Shinji and Warhammer40k, Chapter 30, The Creeping Rot, Part 3. Dr. Sean Vord Lader laughed, his reedy voice filling the hollows. Human limits were wretched. One brain, one frail body, good only up to, at statistical highs, 80 years, and senses only barely capable of perceiving the universe. Pah! Whoever said the human mind was not meant for multitasking was a blithering idiot, he said to himself. Thought springs from hundreds, if not thousands of threads of memory and context. How so efficient in its handling of innate efficiency? His assistants didn't need to say anything. They understood perfectly. The scientist leaned back on his throne-like command chair and exhaled with such blissful relief. Finally, he no longer had to pull along the limited comprehension of those who deemed themselves his colleagues, nor fear the incompetence of his technicians. The screaming was ever present, and he yelled back, "What do I care about your pain? The deception of nerve impulses. Overcome the crass demands of flesh and bone, and there you will find the truth of all existence." The rest of humanity were fools, trapped in their romantic notions of physical propriety. He'd never before felt so free and so fulfilled. There was no feeling like having spare brains, his thoughts lightning quick and unerring, putting all the complicated machinations of man to shame. He stared down at the city and sneered. He could run cerebral rings around the Magi. The mind worms had dissolved all throughout his nervous system, the remains forming into an organ that served like a psychic modem. No loss of concentration. His musings rolled uncertain space at the speed of light itself. Dr. Lader touched his face, pallid and veined, and the flab had hardened as if wax. He wondered why he still had hands. They were unnecessary anyway. Nutrients went directly into his bloodstream, bypassing the time-wasting rituals of chewing, swallowing, and digesting. His lower torso had grafted into his information throne. Why be mobile? He knew everything that happened inside the Earth's Cradle, and its range was practically unlimited. He looked around, with his new, unimaginably vast senses. Never before would he have thought the Orwellian eventuality would be so organic, nor wildly successful. He stared down at his assistants, pitifully crippled with the necessity of pushing buttons and looking at screens. "Humanity is obsolete," he said with finality. There was a raised circular platform at the centre of the command nodule within Irrel. Small lightning sparks danced above the transit points, and with a small boom of displaced air, 3 figures emerged from nowhere. Kaworu and Lader stepped down to the command deck, sure and self-confident. His outfit was the same, but his posture was regal, and his movements determined. Feminine and masculine became meaningless. Adam and its millions of years of victory shone through that expression of pure command. The other Trident Warborn pilots followed gingerly. "Had your fun?" Dr. Lader gave his greetings. He spotted the satisfaction apparent in their faces. It was already fading. How they could possibly have endured such small, miserable lives before their conversion. "It went as well as could be expected," Kaworu replied. "Did you have any difficulties with the jump?" No problems. Strange, time dilates in the opposite direction. 9 days passed here for 6 hours out there." Dr. Lader scratched at the empty air. "We stand at the cusp of a new cosmology. So much new knowledge yet to be realized." "Have you finished the upgrades to my Jagged Wolf?" Martin asked. "The nano-colonies have been integrated fully into the bare metal. A quantum leap in capability." "Yes, I'm impatient too. Let's see how their barely understood little slave growths compare to the power of true symbiosis." "Fine, but let's at least make a show of not making it too easy," Kaworu answered. "Have you filtered the population?"
The fools who thought they could just buy time by being put into stasis. Most of them are useless, physically or mentally unworthy of becoming Homo sapiens superior. There are a few of the soldiers suitable for demi-homo potential. He raved towards his assistants. Of the rest, the symbiotic functions depend on what level of interdependence I require. All serve the greater good in whatever manner best for each.
Thank you, Doctor. Dump the excess. Let them take care of cleaning up our refuge.
The scientist's howling laughter echoed through the control cavity.
Down below, all concerned were already at high alert. Nerve monitors showed the streets starting to empty of people and traffic. Anything was better than standing under that mind-boggling mass hanging impossibly in midair. The mind instinctively went into a panicked overdrive. It was sure to fall at any moment. Run! Hide! The sky is falling! It was a terror so immediate and just so huge for the human mind to comprehend. Those watching from the command centres had the borders of their screens to limit just how much they could see, and it offered the necessary emotional distance. "How's the evacuation?" Misato asked. "The people are being moved to the outer shelters, but there are bottlenecks," Makoto reported. The shelters were all interconnected through a series of tunnels. This eliminated the possibility of people being trapped as if a collective tomb. "The PDF trucks are loading up those who want to get out of the city in a hurry." Ritsuko sucked in her breath. "It's not going to matter in either case. That much mass would collapse the geofront. I don't know if the sidewalls can hold on to keep it high enough above our heads." She ached for a cigarette. "At best, it would only give them a few more minutes to live." "Why isn't it doing that then?" Misato asked, swiveling her chair around. "Our best chance to destroy the thing still for the inside, but not at the cost of our entire civilian population." "Stimuli, I would guess," Ritsuko answered. "Perhaps it doesn't actually have a real concept of a city as a target, but has to focus on specific enemies." The evacuation trucks were keeping to the secondary streets, hiding behind the shadow of buildings. Misato looked up at Gendo and frowned. "This is something beyond even your plans, isn't it? Beyond skill, beyond technology. Overwhelming might and firepower." Humbling in its own way, the utter impersonality of imminent death. She cast her gaze back down to her old friend. Their shared look betrayed their mutual wish. All logic said there was no way they could survive. They needed some way, someone, who tended to spit in the face of rationality and prevail anyway. Misato turned back to the screen and crossed her arms over her chest. She grinned. "You've got the odds of us actually doing anything to damage that thing, right, Ritsuko?" "I'd rather not say, thank you." "I won't listen anyway." She stood up and moved closer to the tower's edge. "Status on the cannon?"
"Charged and ready to fire,"
reported one of the secondary control officers on the secondary command post. "Understood. The pilots?" "They're heading for the Evangelions now," said Maya. "Type S modules are in place and ready for combat." A portion of the main screen showed the Avas already on the lifts, wearing the special high mobility frame. Even Maya had to admit making sure the modified Titan modules could do an emergency plug eject left the Evangelions looking like they had amputated wings. Never pretty in the first place, the Avas were grotesquely misproportioned monstrosities. "Then let's start! The Angel is hereby codenamed Black Moon. The operation? Core Tap." Down below, the pilots were suiting up. Asuka looked on as Rei put on her plug suit with painful slowness. She chose not to help, in respect of Ayanami's own interdependent personality. The blue-haired girl winced as she managed the seals. Bandages were wound tight right below her breasts. She gasped as she pressed the pressure stud on her wrist, and the plug suit sit snug to her flesh. The bandage bumps were apparent. "You don't have to do this, you know," said Asuka. "It might only get worse if you press yourself too hard." "My physical condition has no bearing on the performance of the Evangelion," Rei replied. The dummy plug system should prove that, at the very least, a conscious mind or a whole body wasn't even necessary. Asuka frowned. "Of course it does! Your ratio's gonna get messed up if pain breaks through your concentration. Or if you're too doped up to focus." "That is less important to me, Pilot Tsuyu, as targeting computers may aid my task of fire support. I regret that you must take the brunt of this assault. It is your mental condition that worries me." Asuka groaned. "When did things start getting so complicated? Killing angels, that's our duty. I hate feeling like this, being manipulated by everybody." She turned slightly and gave her fellow pilot a suspicious look.
Even you, it seems.
Nagisa cannot be trusted, Rei replied flatly.
Why not? How's he different from you? From me? We're all forced into doing things we don't understand.
Asuka whirled about and punched at a locker.
At least he had the courage to sit down and try to explain it to me.
Rei placed her hand over her wound. It was disquieting how easily Kaworu had gone through her defences. He was more angel than human. She was more human than angel. They were created that way. If he is acting under duress, then any information he gives cannot be relied upon.
What? Is it real?
Rei tilted her head a bit, a faintly inquisitive expression passing across her face.
Why are we doing this? Is it true that my entire existence is to advance some futile agenda?
Her pleading look conveyed all the watchwords she knew enough not to speak. As far as general history events, perhaps. I cannot speak of personal circumstances, but I do know what you feel, Pilot Tsuyu. Her soft voice took on an edge. Nagisa is using you.
He needs my help!
Asuka shot back.
And so what? Who should I trust? At least he had the balls to face up to the fact he needs others. Useless pride is broken before the greater good.
She let out a slight scream of frustration and slapped her right palm hard upon the lockers.
How about this? Why do you believe in Baka Shinji so much anyway? He abandoned us, just like that. How do you know if he's even still alive out there?
Rei gave a shrug. I would know.
You're delusional,
Asuka responded, hissing. Then she chuckled slightly.
And again, maybe so am I. Don't stand in my way, Ayanami. I'll do what I have to do.
The blue-haired girl nodded. Misato's voice went out from the wall-mounted speakers.
Pilots! To the Evangelions! Security team to the gantries! All maintenance crews stand on alert! This is general infiltration alert! Protect the pilots! Get them to the Evangelions!
A few minutes earlier. The main screens flickered. Angel is emitting jamming raves, Shigeru reported the obvious. They all knew by then, however, that messing up the EM spectrum was a mere side effect of whatever it was doing with the AT field. Switch to secondary systems complete.
Check the Trident base. Are their comm channels usable for a relay?
Misato asked next. Nerve had multiple backup systems and the comm circuits were made more independent of the Magi. They learned their lessons well from Atariel. However, the Earth's Cradle was just so huge that it blocked several microwave transmitters.
Yes, ma'am. They're requesting clearance for bombers over flight. Rejected. We want to keep the Angel off guard for as long as possible. We've got only one chance at this. There's no telling how the Angel will react to a high-energy reaction, Makoto shouted. All barriers up! Brace to receive fire!
Armoured plates closed over exposed gun mounts and hatches. The above-ground crews at their stations grit their teeth and held onto their seats. The PDF soldiers prayed within their vehicles. Misato was too aware of just how vulnerable they were without an AT field, but no one shrank away from their posts. The air began to thrum, and the Angels brought down heart-clenching pressure upon all above. Ritsuko pushed a button. Loudspeakers began to beat out a counter-rhythm. It couldn't counter the frequencies that incited unease at a physical level, but played to the human mind's instinctive pattern searching.
Well, I didn't really expect it to work, said Misato. You've done it again, Ritsuko.
The scientist shrugged. Simply adding something to focus on makes it easier to look past the logical fear. The human mind changes the surge of adrenaline from flee to fight, as intimidation into fear. A lance of sickly yellow light flashed down from Iruo's stark black carapace. It traced down the main street, towards the troops gathered at the edge. The beam of light passed through the layers of armour between the surface and the geofront, seeping into Nerve proper. Those in the way just had to grit their teeth and endure, choosing to remain at their stations. They knew that it was harmless, unless you had a heart condition, that its effects only lasted for a few seconds, no matter how intense and eternal it may seem as it passed over them.
Why is it still doing that?
Misato mused aloud.
What more is there to scan with that beam?
Ritsuko checked the Magi's analysis. The strange immaterial ribbon gave off the same ambient energies as before. She frowned anyway. Unless that was never a scanning beam in the first place. For all its bulk, Iroh's new form could only send out a single psychic beam. It passed through the city seemingly at random. Then it stopped. The air crackled, the tones sharpened, and the beam lashed out at the main street. It was no particle beam, though bright enough to short out optics. When those above got their eyesight back, they saw the puzzling sight that it left behind. One of the lieutenants reported in. "There are people here, a mix of civilians. They're just standing around in the middle of Main Street. They seem to be unharmed. Please advise." The orders bounced around a while through official channels until his immediate superior gave back, "Approach with caution. All indicators are that the staff of the Earths Cradle. See to their condition." One of the APCs rumbled forward. The people were still milling around, confused and purposeless like so much cattle. They responded to the sound of the vehicle's approach, approaching slowly and without much noise. The troops poured out, gas masks on and weapons at the ready. A sergeant among them greeted the strangers in rote English, German and Japanese. The people stared back blankly, except one. A tall brunette woman approached the soldiers with a slow, shuffling gait. "Halt!" the soldier commanded in different languages. "You are commanded to stop. Do not approach any further, or we'll be forced to take appropriate measures." She was rather pretty. The selection process for the Earth's Cradle crew drew upon a certain elitist bent on intellect and beauty, casting irony on old eugenics ethos, along with a predominant staff of Germans. Her blue eyes were unfocused, though apparently seeing as her gaze inspected their line. She veered towards the sergeant. "Help," she said in a tiny voice. "Help." She weakly extended her arms out towards them, her fingers twitching in piteous supplication. The sergeant gestured for the firing line to lower their sights. He decided to approach himself, being the only one there who could speak German. "Hello, madam. It's all right. You're safe now. Do you need any help?" Her eyes glistened with tears. She lurched forward and fell onto his arms. The sergeant was caught off guard, thoughts of possible hazmat contamination falling by the wayside as she hugged and snuggled her face onto his neck, nuzzling him like a lover. "Please, madam, stop. It's all right. You're in Tokyo 3 now." She was licking his neck. He'd always been ticklish. "Okay, that's enough." Then she opened her jaw wide and bit. She snarled, she tore, she chomped away. Her grip became as iron. He screamed. Something slithered out through her lips, into the open wound and clenched itself around his brainstem. The crowd of Earth Cradle cast-off turned, attracted by the noise, and began to shuffle forward. As one, they opened their mouths and let out a low, drawn-out moan. "Oh shit!" Let it not be said that the JSSDF, as assigned to 1st Akone PDF, were too dense to get the implications. They fired in bursts, cutting through the approaching ranks as cover while a few troopers pulled their sergeant free. A bullet to the head silenced the woman attacking him. "Subjects are hostile! Repeat, they are hostile!" the radio man shouted into his point-to-point comset. "Sergeant Hori is down!" The men loaded him back into the APC and the driver gunned it backwards. He was bleeding profusely and thrashing about, making it difficult to treat the trauma. "Hold him steady!" the medic shouted. "Hold him steady!" The sergeant opened his mouth and screamed, and blood went everywhere. The APC kept going in reverse, slamming into the other light tanks barricading the road. It was a loud, ear-scraping clang. The soldiers outside took a moment or two to recover. The woman from earlier, taken down with a headshot, opened her eyes and got up. The others, bloody and full of 5.56mm slugs, likewise rose to join the moaning, groaning, hungry hosts. Irel lashed out again with the sickly yellow beam. It passed through several office buildings, a side street, and one of the shelters. The screaming started in earnest. Deep within Nerve Command Center, Kozo Futsuki turned aside and said, "What the hell, Ikari? Zombies! Zombies, Ikari!" Gendo leaned forward and frowned. "I see. At most, it seemed like the Russians were hiding either a plague or a revolution. Scattered reports showed they had to clean out several towns." The yellow light slashed across the command center. There were leftovers. Maya rolled out of her chair, barely in time as a uniformed soldier snatched at her station. She kicked up at the groin. Her attacker staggered back, but otherwise didn't seem impaired. He was tall, of late middle age, and had a thick, wiry moustache. He lunged at her again. Maya grabbed at his sleeves and hurled him over her shoulder in a textbook judo throw. Masato slapped at the side of her command chair to expose a bin with a pistol within. She pumped several rounds into the Earths Cradle soldier's head. He twitched and lay still. "What the hell is going on here?" Masato yelled. "Help! No! Stay away!" Other control officers in the command centre were not so quick or so lucky. The other attackers were a mix of soldiers and civilians and took a little longer to put down. A few nerve personnel were bitten, and they were starting to blubber with despair. It had to be infectious, right? That was how it worked. "Silence!" Ritsuko yelled into the intercom. Then, in a more reasonable tone, "It's also possible that it's airborne." At everyone's horrified look at her direction, she added, "It's also possible that it isn't something that spreads in the first place." As she said it, she had to admit to herself, not likely. She knew the protocols too. The soldier Masato shot twitched and made as if to rise. "Oh, fuck!" She shot at it again until its brains were so much paste upon the floor plating. "Headshots don't kill them! Headshots should kill them!" Ritsuko got up and approached the fresh corpse. By that point, most had already armed themselves, Maya instantly at her side with a submachine gun. Another thing Masato had managed to talk the accountants into, better last chance sidearms. Ritsuko noticed the brain mass was still wiggling, though the figure no longer moved. Below, one of the wounded nerve employees suddenly lunged from his stretcher to gnash his teeth at those trying to rescue him. He clutched at his own head and spat blood. He slumped back, barely breathing. "They're not zombies," Ritsuko said, watching a worm-like thing slither out from the ruined cranium. "They're alive. They just have parasites." She licked her lips. Technically, that did bring them closer to the actual clinical definition of a zombie. It was also somewhat comforting. There was nothing mystical going on. Except for how the infiltrators were brought in, past all defences. "Damn!" she shouted. "If the angel could teleport itself, why shouldn't it be able to teleport others?" Masato was already shouting into base-wide comms. "Pilots! To the Evangelions!" Most of Tokyo 3's deeper, more secure shelters were linked to each other by a series of tunnels. Communications and monitoring were meant to be unblockable, allowing those within to have a modicum of awareness as to how battles were faring, and could receive without fail instructions from those in command. This meant that almost everyone knew immediately that things were turning for the worse. Kaworu stared down at the city. The bedlam afflicting it was invisible at that height. He knew things were going according to plan. He could taste the fear rippling through Irurel's AT field emanations. The Earths Cradle had a stasis population of 30,000, and their tenders, soldiers, and various other employees numbered another 20. It wasn't yet shut, receiving supplies and personnel shifts from the UN. The Cradle was meant to be self-supporting up to 100,000 people. It was always assumed that they could just tunnel out for more living space. The attack had literally no chance of success. The lowest level of cannon fodder shouldn't be a challenge, shouldn't be feared. Yet, as expected, humans did. Their own old, entertaining delusions worked against them. The people at the shelters could flee, anywhere through the tunnels. But even if the other shelters were safe, the doors remained shut. Selfishly, fearfully, despite all the banging and pleas, they weren't provided with weapons for defence within the shelter. Their only real safety was in keeping the dangers on the outside. "Open this door, you fuckers!" someone shouted through the intercom. "Unlock it or we'll blow it open! This is the Hakone PDF. You're being evacuated. You're not safe there!" "It's a trick!" someone said from within. "But the angel's out there!" added another. "You're too spread out. We need to concentrate you people to a more defensible location." Those within argued with each other. Then Irurel's beam passed through. It left behind one person, though only already wounded. The angel was picking up and putting down worm-eating humans seemingly at random. There was just one, yet panic was complete. The tunnel door couldn't open fast enough. Sergeant De Leon punched someone in the face. "Let me through!" he shouted at the civilians crowding to get out. "Where is it?" He managed to squeeze past them to see the Cradle reject. It was an old man, balding, in a lab coat. No longer white, but soaked with blood, the latest from the child in its arms. The Kirishima Corps Marine watched with distaste as a worm slithered into the little boy's eye socket. The child corpse shuddered, the loose eyeball slid back into place, and then both infested figures turned to him implaceable. His bolt pistol spat thrice. Daka Blorch! Daka Blorch! The autonomous nervous system could be overridden if the brain was damaged by bullets. They weren't so much undead as undying. They healed quickly, like lightning-quick cancer, and cognition was entirely unnecessarily. Bolt rounds removed the ganglion entirely. Can't heal what isn't there. He felt bile rise up in his throat. There was very little left of their heads. Trying to identify casualties later would be a pain. A real pain. The attack was horrifying in its deliberate, malignant insult. The Evangelions were useless at that level. The Marine then wondered how Yang could have possibly anticipated something like it, close enough that his platoon hanging around the shelters turned out to be useful. Yang watched the action display and frowned. "I didn't expect this to happen," he said out loud to the others at the underground Trident Command Center. "The troops at the main entrance of each shelter were supposed to guard against enemies trying to get in. Now they're securing those trying to flee from inside the shelters," Colonel Nasuno replied. "It's better if the Zetas are contained in the tunnels. The Angel's teleport beam can't grab any of them at any one time to relocate of any real tactical significance." He grinned. "Miracle Yang strikes again." The Chinese admiral groaned. "We can't win like this. The Evangelions—" "Firing order confirmed!" the comms officer shouted. "Receiving targeting data from Nerve." Trident-based Tactical Command only had a single flat screen dominating a wall, instead of Nerve's complicated holographic display. Partitioned into windows, it served well enough, as the most significant data was echoed and controlled within personal consoles. The base commander looked aside to Yang, whose console was read-only. "I see. The leg cannon, the heavy defense guns, almost half-hour missile stalks all aimed at one point to force a breach," the colonel said, tracing out the attack lines. "Here's the Evangelion exit point." Yang nodded. "They have the support up to the surface using electromagnetic rails. The only thing that stops them from turning into launches is that they break towards the surface. If that system is shut off," he leaned back, "this could work along with the Type S modules. Katsuragi knows her stuff." One of the small monitoring windows flashed red for attention. Colonel Nasuno expanded the view. At first he thought it was his soldiers firing on the move, then realised the uniforms were the wrong shade of tan. "They're using guns now," he said with such disbelief. The Cradle's rejected soldiers approached with unconscious lurching, their grasp on their weapons barely enough to keep it in their hands. Now and then they'd point up their rifles and pull out a short burst, but the strain of doing so seemed too much to handle for anything longer than a few seconds. A rocket streamed towards the clump, blowing them apart. A yellow beam passed through the obscuring smoke, and when it cleared there was nothing left on the street but streaks of blood. "I don't get it," the colonel snarled out. "This is insane. What does that thing hope to accomplish with these sort of random terror tactics?" "Gain?" Yang scratched at the side of his head. "Times like this it's more on what can be lost. Essential personnel, certainly. If nowhere is safe, then no one, including their families, would dare to stay and work here. It still feels like something's missing, though. That thing should be more than enough to accomplish whatever objectives in destroying or assaulting this city. There shouldn't be any need for further weakening, if the odds are stacked that high for the attacker." "So, there's some unbreakable reason it can't just drop and pour whatever into the jail front?" Yang shrugged. "It's an alien. I'm a historian, not a xenologist." Masato looked left, looked right, and up at the main screen. Everyone was tense, knowing that the enemy could appear anywhere at any time and in any number. They couldn't hold on for long. "All ready to fire on my mark!" she shouted. The Cradle filled the screen, and a red point near the bottom showed the targeting solution. She glanced aside at Ritsuko. Timing it was crucial. "Electromagnetic flow adjustment complete," Ritsuko noted. "Ready to release Evangelions on your command." "Phase 1! Initiate!" The Evangelions shrieked their ray upwards on their electromagnetic rails. "Evangelions on the way! Exit in 80 seconds. Misato bit her lip. Because the jacked Earth's Cradle was just that big, it was impossible to concentrate the fire of 4 heavy positron cannons. The Asashino cannon, of course, was aimed at the Angel's south base. An attack from that direction should be obvious. Just where, however, should be a total surprise until it was too late. The Ava shouldn't have any unnecessary difficulties as it cut through to the inside. 40 seconds. 10. Phase 2! Mark! Bolter turrets, defense lasers, mid-range missiles, the air above Tokyo 3 blazed with deadly colours. The strikes danced across the bleak black surface, pitting and abating away material. It was pitiful. They were like gnats attacking an elephant's side. Phase 3! Mark! All weapons concentrate fire! The screen shorted out from the monumental release of energy. The Ashino cannon's firing sent out a shockwave that smashed windows all over the city, flattening trees nearby, and sent the water around itself to boiling. Evangelion Unit 2 shot out of its exit gate, just as the gaping hole moved above along with Virial's slight spin. It weighed several thousand tons. That much metal was never meant to fly. Ridiculous rockets on its back fired, adding momentum before it reached the apex. Asuka grit her teeth and pushed down with her AT field. There! She unslung her prog chain axe and growled into readiness. She was knocked out of the sky by something big, solid, and moving very, very fast. Unit 2 veered off and slammed into Tokyo 3's pride towers, sliding down while carving out its facade. Above, a strange amalgam of technology and alien biology let out a jubilant screech. Trident Warborn Phoenix Spasm banked its flight and raked at the red Ava with its talon-mounted megabolter cannons. Asuka extended a defensive AT field, then rolled for cover behind a row of buildings. Evangelion Unit 0 emerged soon after, and within a few seconds worth of situation awareness, snapped a few vengeful positron shots at the flying mechanoid. Rei then turned her attention to the cavalry in Irurel's shell. The whole seemed to be healing. It's closing up! Misato yelled. Fire! Pour it in! Keep it open! Blistering fire scraped at the hole and its edges, feebly slowing its regeneration. Unit 0 fired its rockets and just narrowly avoided being shot in the back. The hole spun away from the Ava, and Rei had no choice but to abandon for landing. The dual positron cannon is not suited for this distance, she said. I request custom megabolter cannon for anti-air. Rei! Watch out! Asuka's warning only served as a distraction, as unfortunately she neglected to say from which direction Rei should watch. Trident Warborn Jagged Wolf pounced, its spurs tearing off Unit 0's left arm heat sinks and some of its primary armour. The yellow Ava fell down, punching away at the snarling, toothy face of some sort of giant mechanical velociraptor thing with human-like arms. Unit 2 ran out of cover to help, but stopped as a bright purple lance of energy carved up the street in front of it. Asuka looked up to see an artificial creature wrapped around a huge gun barrel, perched on top of a building as a sniper's nest. Her con line bleeped. I'm sorry, Asuka. Death is unavoidable. Kaworu! Unit 2 ducked and rolled as shots rained down from on high. Trident Warborn Barrel Leos was not aiming to miss. Hakone First Anchorage was a drop-off point for trade essential to Tokyo 3's explosive growth. It was far enough from the city that its security fell under the direct purview of the government, and directly, Trident Base. Officially a naval reserve station, all they knew was that their duty was to serve as nothing more than one more stumbling block for attackers from the sea. Merchants simply loved how much the port facilitated their commerce, and with no added taxation. The Japanese government had a particular mania in encouraging new economic growth around Tokyo 3, despite it being the heavy hazard zone. Most cargo vessels had grown even more blazed than the residents about the dangers of an angel attack. They, after all, could always leave any time they wished, often choosing not to. Having to pull out of harbour at every alert was annoying and burned money. It also gave a certain sense of cheerful camaraderie with their buyers, always a useful bargaining tool. Whatever sense of brotherhood they had was evaporating quickly, as vessels of all sorts fled from the docks. Military patrol craft, a few missile frigates, simply watched them go in cold necessity. There go the sheep, the harbour master thought, watching it all from the yard zone bunker. Most of the screens were a hash of static as Zero-Rail's AT field snarled up radar and most forms of communication. If there's an attack, maybe the enemy will snap at one of these overloaded scows far enough to give us enough warning. He was, like many of the PDF, directly sworn to the UN instead of the Japanese military. The Combined Forces Agreement demanded that NERV share whatever tactical information they had on the situation, as the First Akone took all any and all pain to protecting the populace once an attack was underway. Dedicated fibre optic links ensured this. He didn't need those secure lines to know things were once again going all to hell. The harbour personnel could do nothing but cower within, waiting for NERV and the prefectural defence forces to get things settled. They had an impressive, if limited, selection of land-based guns for defence, but all facing towards the sea. A series of low hills rather conveniently blocked any firing line into Tokyo 3. "Sir, we're getting a transmission," the communications control officer reported. "Ugh, do we have to get ready to receive evacuees?" The presence of a coastline nearby was a boon. It was easier and faster to ship out en masse thousands upon thousands of people in a large ship than having trucks clogging up the highways. "No, sir, it's an outside transmission." "What?" That brought him out of idle contemplation. "Did the Angel stop giving off jamming waves?" He flicked a look at the screens. Obviously not. Various forms of tight beam communications might work, but the extent of Zero-Rail's jamming feed was proportional to its size. He already knew that the skies were blacked out all the way up to Izu. The comms officer shook his head. "It's radio, sir. They're burning through interference using a simple omnidirectional message and sheer wattage." The harbour master blinked. "What? Don't they know that the Angels react to high energy emissions? Who are these fools?" ID confirmation. Okay. The codes were processed through the database. "Cruisers Carringdall and Kringalith registered with the UN Navy for special detached operations based off the Mediterranean. The clearance code is Russian, though." "They're a long way from home. What do they want?" "Approaching scheduled docking. Request situation report. Answer, Tokyo 3. Are you still there?" The harbour master winced. "They don't know we're under attack. If they're caught within the Angel's AT field, their dinky little transmitters may be distorted enough to foul even satellite comms. We have no choice. We've got to respond the same way." His tower crew nodded respectfully, though they knew that already. "Tell them to buzz off. It's too dangerous." The message was sent. A few moments later, a reply. "Danger is no obstacle to duty. Clear the docks for our arrival." What kind of morons are we dealing with? I said no! Send it again! Ships and armies were no match for Angels. Reinforcements would only hinder the Evangelions and the heavily rehearsed tactics of the prefectural defence forces. "Aye, sir. Transmit." A yellow glow bathed the control room, and soon the Hakone soldiers had other problems to deal with. Note to self, the harbour master thought while struggling with some snarling salarymen. See if it's really illegal to wear ceremonial swords while on duty. White bands crawled across the city map, until all was leached of colour. As you can see, over the past month, the Angel was able to scan all significant areas of Tokyo 3. Gendo frowned down at her. Has it not been sufficiently demonstrated that these scanning beams serve another purpose entirely, Dr. Akagi? Ritsuko shrugged. Perhaps. However, it would also bear more evidence that Angels prefer a single tool to have many uses. I believe it is a side effect of having portions of their own biology serve the function of such tools. She smiled slightly. While it's certainly unwise to underestimate the enemy, even its vastly increased prowess supports a theory that it had to sacrifice what other Angels had in terms of mobility, raw smarts, and directed energy beams as weaponry. Everyone waited. The seconds ticked by. God damn AT field magic! Ritsuko just had to say it through clenched teeth. Even Gendo had to smile a little. Good old dependable Ritsuko. So, you do have some idea of what's happening. And how to stop it? Misato added, her voice pitching up in feeble hope. Ritsuko just sighed. Ordinarily, the answer would be simple. It's nothing more than a more concentrated region of absolute territory. Inasmuch as mass warps space to produce the effect of gravity, so does the beam confuse quantum certainty. At the blank look on their faces, she sighed deeper. It's not teleportation. The fucking thing's messing with time and it's pissing me off. That pricked the professor of metaphysics. Are you sure? Is it that, dangerous? Impossible? Kozo Futsky beamed as he found the right word. Confusing. Ritsuko rubbed at her head. You have no idea. Masato raised her hand. Ritsuko didn't look up. Yes, Masato? Can we save the techno-babbling for later? How do we stop the fucking zombies? It's gotta be illegal somewhere that headshots don't work. Actually, I'm pretty sure it's not, Ritsuko longed to say. The dead moving around isn't loitering, and eating someone's brain isn't murder. One might as well complain about being verbally abused by a chair. How can you punish or even prosecute the dead? The scientist glared up at the angel, as if its very existence was proof that the universe had a very definite grudge against her. I think I have a solution, but the pilots will need to get rid of other distractions first. Their conversation was not a bubble of sanity in a roaring tide of hysterical activity, but rather came up through the momentary lulls in battle. The main screen showed the Evangelions still locked into combat with their hybrid counterparts. Come on, Sayu! Give me some sport before you die! Martin Bettelheim bellowed. How glorious it was to have his machine sport functional lungs, teeth, tongue and throat. Unlike the Evangelions, which needed to be intentionally crippled, the plug inserting into the gap between the spine and the brain. His jagged wolf had a mind of its own. Eat shit, ass muncher! Asuka responded, tackling the Trident unit from the side and sending it stumbling into a building. She flipped her hold on her prog knife and carved out a long gash right across its long neck. The strange biomechanical creature screeched and thrashed about in pain. Asuka felt something slam into her stomach, and her Evangelion was thrown back to embed itself into the opposite row of buildings. The Eva groaned and pushed its face through layers of concrete. Asuka saw the enemy dripped purplish fluid similar to blood, and its gaping wound showed mottled cords like roots crawling across the gap, knotting and pulling it shut. Soon enough, there was barely a mark that it had ever been injured. I see. It doesn't have an AT field, but being able to heal fatal wounds so quickly is the next best thing to having a cumbersome shield. She extended her AT field like a pressure wave to push it back. The enemy began to lose its balance. Then frills rose up from the back of the Trident Warborn's neck. It opened its beak-like jaws again and roared. It stomped at the ground and charged. Unit 2 danced out of the way like a matador. What are you? Asuka whispered, as once more she was forced to give ground. The mad laughter of the pilot filled her comms. Evangelions! Ha! They share the same stagnant limits as the short-sighted humans who built them. Look at me, Soyo, and fear. I am the future of humanity, immortal, the Superman, the fearless knight, and this is my steed. Growing, becoming stronger with every battle. Devour and take her strength. Jagged roof, das Krutakaya! Her backup prog knife deployed from Unit 2's left shoulder pylon. She needed a better close-in weapon than it. The Warborn unit bore down the street with fast, easy lopes. Asuka stepped back and stabbed out, leaving her knife embedded in the Krutakoa. A part of her was baffled by the name. It's lame to just jam together syllables! It was part of the reason she'd yet to really name her own Evangelion. Calling it the Red Knight just seemed so obvious. She stepped back as the enemy lashed out with beak and talon. Hey, Soyu! Watch where you step! She heard his taunting again. There was a distant crunch beneath her feet. Reflectively, Asuka looked down to see a crushed APC. Soldiers were running for cover. In the path of their skirmish, the two metal giants, there were left smears of red and clumps of misshapen material. She'd stopped above one of the shelter exits and could see people huddled behind the main gate, at the knife's edge of panic. They had to flee from horrors within, but could not as long as their own protector was a greater menace. A few months earlier, Asuka wouldn't have cared. However, with Nerve Germany gone, with Shinji away, she realised these were her people too. Tokyo 3 was all she had left. They respected her, and her own honour couldn't spurn their need. Martin spat. Weak. The Krutakoa leapt at the Ava, slamming it into the hillside. This is what happens when the weak delude themselves into thinking they have any hold over the strong. This is what happens when the strong allow the weak to steal their strength. You sicken me, Soyo. Die! Die and wash away the shame of what you could have been! Asuka grit her teeth and forced the Ava's hands over jaws aching to bite her head off. The Trident Warborn's own claw-tipped arms raked at her armour. She was trapped! Pshack! The Trident Warborn knew what it felt to have its head ventilated. Asuka pushed away as it briefly went slack, and retreated to the nearest weapons cache. What does it take to kill these things? She screamed inside her head. She could already see the holes starting to heal. The innards of the jagged wolf-type Trident Krutakoa seemed to be made out of tangled veins, thick and metallic like roots. A short distance away, beams answered each other. Rei didn't engage her enemy in banter. Kaworu knew better than to try and spook her into some tactical error. A sniper battle was of tensile patience and silence. The barrel Leos had the advantage in that it could fly, and shift its perch among the many tall buildings of Tokyo 3. Unit 0 had the AT field, which served in good defensive capacity, but made it easier for the enemy to know her location, and that there was more cover available at ground level. Rei also had an additional malice in that she had to provide support to Asuka, while at the same time attempting to take out her own mirror opponent. Kaworu could simply care less about his teammates. If they could disable the Evangelion and capture Asuka, good. If not, no great loss. Rei ducked into a hollowed-out building as the third member of the Trident Warborns passed. The Phoenix Spasm was the smallest and most complex, now having true rings instead of clumsy auto-gyros for flight. Rei wondered how that was possible. She was sure it still weighed several thousand tons, and not all that aerodynamic. It didn't seem to have a core. Perhaps, like Sister Ibuki, being unable to generate an AT field does not preclude an inability to use it. Irel had a vast region of altered space, and more than enough to provide flying room. Rei tightened her grip on her dual positron cannon. It wasn't suited for anti-air work. Did she dare take the shot, hoping the paired beams would be enough to bring it down? Or was that Kaworu's plan, again using the flyer as both scout and bait? Sarah Campbell noticed something moving, a large box thing upon the oversized railroad leading into the city. It is the third. Do I engage? She asked Kaworu. Well, it's not like it's that much of a threat, the Angel Hybrid answered. Have fun! The Trident Warborn veered off and flew to meet the bastard child of the Trident project. Magnos Tancred greeted with missile and positron and megabolter. Unsurprisingly, Mana Kirishima was beyond pissed at seeing the abominations. This is the true Trident project, she shouted to her crew. Shoot this worthless pretender down! Tancred is rage! Kill it! Purge it! We won't rest until these abominations are dead! Rei watched as the blocky red and black machined weapons sprayed at the sky. Megabolter rounds were each mini-missiles, and by virtue of sheer size were not so limited as the comparative scale bolt rounds. So thick and so fast was the spray of firepower that it seemed as if a single coherent beam. But the Phoenix Spasm swung lazily around that needle of pure hostility. Unlike energy guns, which flash into being at an instant, it was easy to see how the shots would jerkily adjust. Soon the megabolter fell silent. Hovering just above the Trident land cruiser, it was safe. The only weapon Magnos Tancred had which could point up was the megabolter. The Trident Phoenix, however, could bomb it with impunity. It had the same 20mm anti-aircraft cannon that Magnos Tancred had, in a similar chin mount. It could aim anywhere else but up. The land-bound Trident made a hopping motion to get out of the tracks and shred down the hillside with its pillar-like feet. Acid ate into the rocks behind. Standard explosive and kinetic weapons were either less effective against the masses of metal that characterized the Evangelions, or just too heavy to carry to the air. Sarah allowed herself a small smirk as she swung around. There were many other weapons at her disposal, but this seemed so apt. Passive, clinging, and slowly but inexorably destructive. Reload! Reload! Mana yelled, urging her crew into the city. She remembered how deadly acid could be. It was used back then, when her heart died along with her friends. Rei turned away, knowing she could do nothing to help. Across the city, Asuka. To her own left, Mana. She had her own problems. More than ever, she had to ensure that the third enemy would focus on her, preventing anyone from ganging up 2-on-1. She pushed left, with her AT field. A pebble moved. Unit 0 burst out of cover. It ran down the street and jumped, smashing into a building's 7th floor. Then from that again, all the way across the street, hopping to the roof of the next poor, abused structure. Rei slung her dual positron rifle over her shoulder and fired blind behind her back. The Trident barrel Leo jerked aside, dodging the beams, while at the same time firing its own massive spinal cannon. Rei somersaulted backwards, following through another double shot, emptying the cyclic capacitor. Her expression and Kaworu's were identical. Both were secure in the knowledge they were tools. There was no fear, and unto every moment they gave their utmost. Their thoughts were the same. You know that I know that you know that we both know we cannot pretend to make mistakes. There's only death. Rei counted on the massive bodyform cannon having a slower cycle rate than their own dual positron shooters. At the same time, it should be obvious that Kaworu knew his weapon's weaknesses. What would the other do in that situation? Boom! One massive beam shot met two smaller ones, curving around each other. Rei flared her AT field and skimmed across the magnetic disturbance, a prog bayonet blazing red at the end of her weapon. The Trident Warborn rolled over, its shape so like a pig to the slaughter, but revealing two normal-looking arms, each grasping a prog knife. Sparks flew. Unit 0 in free fall put all its weight into every slash, and used every parry for the leverage needed to keep it in the air a bit longer. It was a flurry of physical violence, and at the end both were unscathed. Rei dropped, cracking concrete beneath her feet. Her Ava looked up, and wished it had a mouth to roar in defiance. "I do not fear you, sister," Kaworu said to her from on high. "My blood is not your blood, Nagisa," Rei answered. "My call is not your call." "Cousins, then, but you know what I mean. You can't beat me. You never could, never will. We may be evenly matched in many things, but sometimes environment does mean more than genetics." He smirked slightly. "I will always be that slight bit more powerful, more ruthless than you." "Perhaps. It is not enough for you to prevail today." Rei opened up the comm channel and copied his expression. "You will die, Nagisa, and not by my hand." Kaworu sniffed. "Sometimes I wonder if I only fear him because of your recommendation, my bitter reflection." "Then again, he isn't here, Ayanami-san. Now what do you do? How pitiful and alone you are, without the greater good to sustain you." "I am never alone," Rei replied oddly, perhaps even sadly. The orange Evangelion then quickly disappeared back into cover. Down below, things were steadily getting worse. Crumpled and ruined APCs dotted the streets. The shattered remains of gunships and main battle tanks showed how easily the battling giants could crush insects that caught their attentions. Man was enough to kill man. The characteristic smoke column of an anti-tank rocket flashed across the street to slam into the rough barricade of vehicles, armoured and otherwise. "These fuckers can use weapons now!" one of the JSSDF Marines shouted. "Shut it and keep that motor going, Takahashi!" Sergeant DeLeon yelled back. "It's no use, man! It's no use! They just keep coming no matter how many times we shoot them!" Someone shouted from one of the APCs. The 50 cal machine gun he had was dry, and he had to fight to keep his eyes just so. Sergeant DeLeon sneered and climbed back up to the barrel. Mortar rounds whistled above. It was true, merely blasting away at the zombies didn't stop them. Most of their attackers were already naked, and all could see how they were healing up even as they moved. People caught behind the lines were either eaten for biomass or turned into one more of the shambling horde. Many were armless, or crawling, or just misshapen. Bones took longer to regenerate. He grit his teeth and fired. Daka! In slow, careful shots. The bolt rounds turned heads into flecks of blood. "Keep your discipline!" he shouted. "Headshots will kill them! You'll just have to remove the head!" The problem was that they were starting to run out of ammo. Astounding. There were old jokes about needing 1,000 bullets to kill just one man as an average in every war, but it was getting ridiculous. The larger weapons that could reliably blow apart a torso or just decapitate someone were obviously too limited to waste on a mindless horde. At least the angel had stopped shining its sickening light at them and placing infected forms behind the barricades. It seemed to be flashing away at things in the distance. The roar of approaching jets was heard, if murkily, of the ever-present hum of the angel. The steady beat nerve sounded to counter its more obvious effects, and the dreadful moaning from the mindless horde beyond. Our reinforcements are getting cut off! Poor bastards! Pilots can't handle something clawing and biting and just won't die that appears in their cockpit, Takahashi noted, loading the mortar at a regular pace. Tanks too! That made it even easier. At least the APCs had enough room to wrestle one's way out if necessary. Isn't that inefficient? A bomb would be quicker, replied his fire team partner. Several strike fighters zoomed towards the angel, as if on a kamikaze run. However, holes open up in that bleak, impenetrable shell to suck them in. Nobody respects us grunts. If you put someone intelligent enough to drive something back. Hey! Free stuff! He paused in his loading and spat aside. That's why. It's not gonna matter. If they were just dumb monsters, we'd be laughing over our beers right now. If they were just like men, reasoning and capable of being afraid, we might live through this. But this... It's not fair, damn it! He slammed the mortar round into the tube harshly and only narrowly avoided getting everyone around him blown up. Fuck this shit! Everyone shut the hell up! Sergeant de Leon shouted into his megaphone. They were supposed to hold the outer barricades, retreating eventually in an eerie parody of trench warfare. Morale was bleeding away by the minute. If it was this bad among those who knew they had the weapons capable of reliably killing the deathless enemy, how much worse for the civilians huddling beyond? The bolt rifles were never really meant for accuracy. That they were proving so useful ironically meant they had to be conserved. The Kirishima Corps Marines had thought the most they had to do was serve as living shield for Trident pilot Kirishima. Slowly they thinned the enemy lines, while eerily aware they had nowhere near the amount of bolt rounds necessary to take out even half the horde. Those less used to the bolt rifles had to settle for the 5.56mm punch of the more common assault rifles. Dimly he wondered how the 7.62mm rounds used at the mainland would fare. Probably better. It looks as if this was the reason both Russia and China mobilized their armies. China was the world's largest producer of bolt weapons and ammunition, after all. Hell, both were used to human wave attacks. He sighed. Useless to ask for what they did not have. He stared at the advancing line of infested people. It was impossible to discern which among them held enough lingering intelligence to use weapons. Bodies were piled high enough that these served as a barrier that the horde slowly pushed through. It was a horrible sight, and a stinking disaster. Only dimly did he realize one of the regular troops had put down his rifle. The man's expression was slack as he took out his pistol, pointing it at the soldier beside him. Sergeant de Leon had no time to think. He tackled the man. "Oh, shit! He's infested!" screamed the soldier with a bolt rifle. "How? The thing's got behind the lines!" The others moved to finish him off. "Get back to your posts, you fools!" the sergeant yelled. "He's not infested." "Then why?" "I recognize someone. You just shot his wife!" Bolt rounds left barely identifiable messes behind. Beautiful, ugly, young, old. It didn't matter. The one who did that winced. It was a hell of a final sight to remember your beloved as a headless ruin. "But she was dead anyway." "I know," the stricken soldier blubbered. "Don't you think I know? Kyoko!" He let out a primal scream and collapsed, sobbing. Sergeant de Leon let him go. He took back his rifle and faced the horde. Incredible. The angels killed whatever chance for victory the humans of Tokyo 3 had left. Even if they won, even if they survived, they would never be able to call it victory. It was dark under Uriel's shadow, and the air itself seemed to sap all hope. Behind tall buildings he could discern the flashes of continued fighting. The power of the Ava. It was still unpredictable. Even smashing that immense globe might not be enough to prevail. This is just damn evil. He heard a distinctive beep on his headpiece. The sergeant went down from the barricade to the field radio. It was plugged into one of the many steep-level sockets leading into underground lines, and could receive signals from both NERV and the JSSDF. Ordinarily, this would have been a horrid communications vulnerability, but with the Angel's tendencies to be rather huge and physics-raping, it seemed prudent to secure battlefield contact. They'd not really anticipated ever needing to fight against people. After a while, he shouted, "We've got orders. We are pulling back and moving the people north, away from the lakefront." "What? Why?" he was asked. That way led right into the mass they were fighting. That put civilians directly under the Angel. He looked at them, so weary, fully aware of just how little they were in a war of monstrous proportions. "They didn't say," he said, but figured he owed them his best guess. The sergeant pointed up, then arced his finger down to indicate a ballistic trajectory. "A bombing." "They wouldn't." "Of course they would." He forestalled any further discussion. "We don't have time to waste. They say we have less than 10 minutes. Let's clear them a path." He saw the reserve units already moving up to join them. There were so many streets of Tokyo free, and so many isolated pockets of resistance. There were tunnels leading right out of the city. However, those same escape tunnels had turned into death traps. The only way out was above ground, with all the risks that implied. The PDF was slowly fighting their way through towards Trident Base, which had its own shelters and defences necessarily devoted to dealing with human-sized enemies. Why go back to the worst of it? Why let themselves be surrounded again? Yang said so, and his inscrutable ways may have proved useful. The sergeant felt it would shortly become far too annoying for the poor grunts. The harbour master wheezed and wiped blood from his brow. It was difficult, but fortunately there were only 3 of the things. One of his people had died, her throat torn out, but fortunately the others managed to get the thing away before it could pass on its infestation. "There are mostly worms inside," said the medic. He shared the others' reluctance in calling those they just beheaded as people. "Somehow the worms serve the function of muscles and internal organs. Healing is only so much the matter of connecting these together." "Is it possible to get someone back if they're only freshly been infected?" he asked. "If it's a matter of physical parasites, then maybe all we need is to remove—" "Unfortunately, no. The things attack the brain first of all. Of course, once they're in the neck, any attempt to immediately remove them can prove fatal. It's not like most zombie viruses. Fatality is quick and total. There's no immunity. There's no cure." "Sir, more message burn-throughs." Wearily, the harbour master turned to the communications officer. "Those idiots are still alive?" "Well, we can't give them any help. We've got our hands full as it is." "No, message is clear docks for immediate disembarking. We're coming in." The land-trapped old sailor groaned. "It's worse here, it's worse! Why don't they get that? It's better to run aground a few miles off. No, wait, that might just spread the infestation. Better we all die together. Send that." The clicks and buzzes of a powerful signal continued. "Acknowledge, can't be worse. One question. Do you want to live, or do you want the enemy to die?" "What kind of stupid question is that? This is no time to play word games." "Sir." "What?" "Landline message from Trident Base. Same question." A chill passed through the harbour master. "They're going to start bombing, aren't they?" He slumped back on his feet. "Do I want to live?" "Of course." He wondered if it was possible to run far enough away from the blast effect. Slowly he realized if the Angel's wind and nowhere was far enough. He saw the same grim recognition in the young faces around him. "All right. Reply. How can we make it die?" Trident Base was in an uproar. The ill-named production model Tridents were still fighting the Evangelions in their own beloved Trident Land Dreadnought. The troops were barely holding back an infested human tide. The zombie-like horde had proved capable of using the defenders' own weapons, tanks and all, against them. If only they weren't so damn unpredictable about it. Sometimes it seemed as if the horde reacted to head off human orders, then at other times just mill around with no goal in sight. It was hard enough trying to keep the fighters from cracking. Then, out of the blue, Yang abused his observer status by giving out another suggestion that put it all at risk. A direct link to NERV was open up on the main screen. Masato Katsuragi stared balefully down at the middle-aged Chinese man. The two didn't have much prior contact, knowing that it was unseemly. Their very existence challenged the tactical prerogatives of the other.
If you want me to release control of strategic N2 weapons, then you better have something better than "because I said so." We're still fighting here.
Yang bowed. I know, General Katsuragi. However, there are new assets that can't come into play until we cleared away, so to speak. He looked aside to one of the tactical officers. May I have the location data, please? Thank you. A map of the local Hakone region appeared on screen. Tokyo 3 is ideally protected by a ring of mountains, sheltering it from attacks from the sea. The Angel may be 6 kilometers tall and hovering just inches above the tallest building at that. The mountains can still manage to hide enough of its bulk from offshore fire due to angular difference.
So you're asking we chip the top of Mounts Futago and Sunsan?
Masato whistled.
What the hell do you have out there?
Her look narrowed.
It's some kind of direct fire weapon, isn't it?
The hole made by their earlier concentrated attack had still not healed over. Ideally, that was the best place to focus fire on again. It is as you say. He bowed self-effacingly again. It was supposed to be delivered today. Masato looked at the screen. Twin triangles showed estimates of where 2 ships were.
Right. Why don't you tell me more about these reinforcements?
I'm afraid I don't really have much to reveal. I only have barely more than what's been given to base command, only that it has a comparable yield to the lake cannon. That sparked Misato's interest.
You can't seriously be considering this blatant act of geographical vandalism,
Ritsuko asked archly from off-screen.
How long until they get here?
Less than 10 minutes. Bombers already flying around in circles, waiting for release, Colonel Nasuno replied. Getting in close enough to precisely carve out the firing lines would be a suicide mission. The Angel was ganking vehicles that got into some unspecified rage. The bombers would have to unload everything, or crash their planes, rather than let the enemy get its claws on N2 warheads. Masato licked her lips.
All right, we don't have time to waste. The Evangelions need all the support they can get. I authorize limited release of N2 weaponry in Tokyo 3's area of responsibility.
She glanced aside and upwards, glaring to remind them all she held the ultimate authority in such matters, and if it all goes wrong, the blame. Thank you, Colonel Katsuragi. Yang bowed again and grinned. Masato boggled. That reminded her so much of her lost child, it twinged a hidden hurt. The link switched off. You had better be right, Trident Base's own colonel warned. Yang put his hands into his pockets in a casual affectation, leaning back on his chair. His right hand clenched upon a pendant he had received in the mall earlier that day. It was a stylized eye, and a note that accompanied it merely said, I had nothing whatsoever to do with whatever zombies you may have heard of, but solutions present themselves. It was unsigned. I can only hope, he replied. I've done my part to make it easier. The future belongs to someone else. The light burned stone. Everyone was stunned into silence as the shock wave passed over them. So far, the defenders had hoped to keep the vast bulk of the Earth's Cradle in a mood of non-interference with the fighting underneath. The spread of infected forms was frightening, but of all the things Irrael could have done, it was the least. This, it was sure to jar it awake. Slowly, sensors returned. The N2 warheads were not the city destroyers by any means, but more than enough to shatter a substantial amount of rock from the sides of the peaks. Gravity did the rest. As expected, the behemoth of an Angel went into a sort of freak-out. Beams lashed out all over, depositing infestation. Those watching noticed that for the first time, it seemed to take an interest in infesting buildings. They can understand worms taking control of people, but how does it take over structures of steel, concrete and glass, and to what purpose? The physicality of the Earth's Cradle hovering over their heads reminded them it was possible, and that whatever the crawling green roots spreading across the city were meant to be, it wasn't good. The south was shrouded in smoke. Then, 2 purplish beams punched through to carve across Irrael's curving flank. Then 15 seconds later, another pair. The incident angle was off by several degrees, enough to hint that it came from a different pair of cannons. A thundering pressure railed across the city. The angel, so huge and thickly protected, was in pain. "What is that?" Misato shouted. She watched the Trident Warborn Phoenix Spasm swoop away from converging beams. It flew erratically, chased by positron beams from kilometers out, leaving behind a trail of ugly gashes into the cradle's matte black skin. It had to retreat to the safety of the floating globe's other hemisphere. "What the? They can aim!" Misato whooped. "Ha! From that far away they can aim! How?" Misato looked puzzled. The AT field jamming could even slightly distort light, leading to the mirage-like sheen occasionally showing through their cameras and making even LiDAR or IR somewhat touchy. It was the heavy cruiser Kringalith, a 2004 design. Made primarily for bombardment duties, it had a good hull, reliable guns and very little electronics. It was a relatively cheap Rei to force compliance upon a shoreline. Not since D-Day back in June 6, 1944 had that much shelling or combat landings been necessary. The day was July 6, 2016. The Kringalith lost its forward and aft 14cm turrets, each replaced with dual positron cannon turrets. The bore was less important than wattage, but they were called by the crew as 20cm Brightlands. The cannons were firing in sequence, though each had cycle time of 4 seconds at a drain capacitor setting. This left no gap between shots spitting at Tokyo 3. The sea around the ship began to boil. Heat sinks were made to contain heat and safely radiated out to the air. The ship dumped its waste heat into the Pacific. Around each turret sat 6 people, bald and clad in robes, uncaring of the danger. They chanted sutras of praise and encouragement. Inside the firing stations, similar men with funny-looking conical hats stood with their eyes closed and mumbled strings of numbers that the gunners preferred over the firing values the computers offered. Irel lashed out. People appeared on the decks. The swords worn by the crew were decidedly not ceremonial. Its sister ship, the Carringdol, went towards the anchorage at maximum speed. It didn't slow as it neared the docks, instead turning hard to port to present its side. The harbour master watching it had to shout, "No way, they're crazy!" The ship slammed sideways into the port, crumpling itself into the concrete piers. The side cargo doors opened up, and people rushed out to unload. Sections of the hull were even blown open, so the tanks could roll right out of the ship. There was a waiting mass of infested populace, along with several seized tanks. They were scythed through as the reinforcements rolled out. Sergeant de Leon and his marines were battling for their lives as the infested converged upon the concentrated civilian populace. Tokyo 3 had a population of just under 1 million. The Earths Cradle had a contingent of around 40,000. As the minutes went by, the disparate numbers had to adjust, closer and closer towards equality. He looked towards the other end of the enclosure. Nerve refused to let people down into the geofront, citing important security issues. Objectively, he knew that so many people could in the end be turned into a walking army of the deathless, to swarm over the meagre defenders underground. Opening up also invited infiltration from a variety of other unforeseen enemies. It didn't mean he felt any less resentful. The civilians were topping out their fear and rancour for the supposed rulers of the city. If not for Hiraki, Suzuhara and Ada, the soldiers still couldn't get over it. Children had to take the brunt of that responsibility. So many people, trapped, certain death hanging over them. The only thing worse than an unthinking mob was an unthinking, cannibalistic, undying mob. The children. They were oddly enough the bedrock of calm, with such pure certainty in that it would be all right. Their parents had to maintain their composure, as unconsciously it shamed them. To drive away the horrid sounds, the people sang songs, especially the theme of Evangelion Fantasy Battle. He turned back to the battle. He heard his bolt rifle click. Empty. He loaded his last drum of bolt rounds. 30 shots. There were thousands battering themselves at the barricades. "What are you looking at, you apes?" He laughed at his men, those he had suffered with all the years. "You want to live forever?" Takahashi, ever the jokester, ever griping, but actually the first to accept the gaijin in their midst, blanched. He grimaced over the undying horde. "No way! I'm saving this grenade for myself!" Everyone nodded. Even killing oneself with a bullet to the brain only saved the awareness of being taken over. The freshly dead were as useful as to infection as the living. At least, in contradiction with zombie movies, anyone dying behind the lines would remain a corpse until the horde swept over them. The worms need to eat brains. That's what we're fighting. Not people, not zombies. There's nothing mystical or macabre about this. The sergeant thought as he pulled at the trigger. Worms! Just worms! We're exterminating some pests! If only the things were not so damn hard to kill. He heard the click. That final, unmistakable click. There went the last of their bolt rounds. Normal rifle rounds could only slow down the horde. Even that was already limited. Some of the other troops made as if to hand their rifles over to those up at the barricades. He shook his head. No. They still have to get up here, Sergeant de Leon said. And to his squad, fix bayonets. The bayonets were long carbon steel, taking advantage of the bolt rifle's hardier stock. A few had even custom attachments, making the bolt rifle an impromptu axe instead of a spear. The rate should make decapitation easier. He'd long strayed from the faith of his childhood, but looking at all those dead faces, the old images from Judgment Day came to mind. He no longer believed, but he made the sign of the cross and was comforted. It was time to die. Enough of the infested ones had fallen to serve as the undying horde's own ramp up the barricades. He thrust his bayonet into someone's eyes and sort of jiggled it around inside. He kicked that one back, and even as he fought to push others off, noted with relief that it didn't get back up. Too many. Put hungry! He screamed and chopped and thrust and gave the people hiding inside the amphitheatre that few more precious minutes to live. He heard one of his team pulled under. He didn't know who. It no longer mattered. They all fought on, uncaring of what may happen. Then heard the distinctive sound of a bolt gun. Dagger, 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 dagger! A bolt gun in full automatic fire, wasteful and also very lethal. 2 of them, then 4, then 6. The horde crumbled under the assault, so much that even those attacking the barricades fell back in some instinct to retreat. And he saw tanks. Big tanks. Tall and ugly, and somehow he knew at first sight these were Russian-made. Lozenge-style tanks rode high, and sponson mounts on either side. A tank feature unseen since the First World War spat out sweeping death. A frontal bolt gun scattered enemies in front. None struck by the guns rose again. The cannon. He'd never seen a cannon that big, not even on artillery. It was rather short, with reinforced bands, and angled slightly upwards like a howitzer. The 2 Lehman Russ fired their battle cannons, and those in the military gaped at the sight. Ada, just when he had joined in the fight not one had noticed, gave voice to their common consternation. What the hell? That's a boulder shell! It's not mega boulder size, but what the hell? The Russian had managed to sink a cruiser ship cannon to tank size, but the 8-inch caliber instead. It was sufficient. Incendiary rounds lit up the avenue. Bolt guns continued to clear the way. Something boomed from the shadows and struck at the Allied tanks. One of the C's JSSDF main battle tanks rumbled out with its proven 120mm cannon. An armour-piercing round slammed into the lead Lehman Russ, stopping it cold. The other heavy tank returned fire with its battle cannon. Amazingly, neither shot managed to penetrate armour. The Lehman Russ had a glacis plate 13 inches thick, of the same material the Evangelion armour was made of. Its 8-inch bolt cannon, however, was more of a snub howitzer. With its thick frontal armour and multiple bolt guns, the tanks were intended for infantry support as a mobile strongpoint. The 3rd Lehman Russ joining in, however, had a longer straight barrel designed for anti-armour duty. Oh, and was decorated with gold filigree. The infested tank never had a chance. Is this the only active shelter? Someone asked for the external speakers. Are there more people who need help? Yes, there are 3 more secure zones, the people at the barricade shouted back. Keep going, they're at the hotel row and the supermall. More conventional tanks and APCs approached, along with several large cargo trucks. UN soldiers, for some strange reason mostly of the Chinese and Russian strategic forces. But it was no time for odd grudges. Yang could be inconvenienced later. For the moment, ensuring the safety of civilians and supporting the wearied defenders was all important. Sergeant de Leon was not in command. There was a JSSDF lieutenant for that. The Marine merely sighed and sat, suddenly so weary. He looked aside at his squad. Amazingly, all of them managed to survive. if all battered and bloody as he was. They grinned at each other. Medics were already arriving to tend to the wounded. Before things could get settled, however, Irael let out a bass growl. Holes appeared along its bottom and black globs dropped down. One splattered behind the barricades. The reinforcements seemed to recognise the sticky blobs and were afraid. "Mutation forms!" the call rang out. The bolt-rifled Chinese soldier ran up the barricades and began shoving people around. This immediately irked the troops still there, and something unfortunate might have happened had not the glob started to twist and rise. From out of that sticky black glop, something hunched, clawed, and faintly bird-like hooted. As one, the undying hordes charged again. Bolt rounds were unloaded without restraint. All the soldiers up on the barricades focused fire on the single creature stuck behind the line. No less than 20 bolt rounds met on its flesh at any one time, and despite gouts of blood and flesh it kept going. It screamed and leapt, and taloned feet unerringly brought down a volunteer red guard. Then it swept the barricades, a creature of slashing, screeching, biting ferocity. Bolt rounds sank into its body, exploding inside as hinted by momentary bulges, but it continued on fighting. It was unstoppable. A javelin, tipped with a strange sparking blue blade, struck it between its beady black eyes. The creature melted, giving off one last agonizing, indignant screech. That was an infant angel, wasn't it? Sergeant de Leon breathed out. He asked the soldier beside him, like him seemingly drained of all energy. "Niet," the RSSDF soldier replied. He looked far too young, and replied in clipped angel. "This is idea of infant angel. It does not really exist as life, as matter as we know. We think this be what happens when psychics are taken over." Sergeant de Leon nodded. Everyone knew that Russia had the highest population percentage of psychics. As if knowing what he was thinking, the foreign soldier laughed, only stopping as his wounds pained him. He handed over his bolt rifle. "Battle is not finished yet, yes? You fight for your country and your people. Might get to see something wonderful." The JSSDF Marine wondered just what glorious sight there could possibly be in war, but took the rifle with thanks. He turned back to the barricade and gasped. The horde swelled like a tide, surged like the surf and rushed at the tanks. The bolt guns could repel them no longer, and the Lehman Russ became as islands under a sea of undeath. Infested ones clawed at the hatches, spitting out worms that slowly ate into metal. The tanks reversed, the sound of crunching bones rising above the tumult. One of the large trucks rolled ahead, turning sideways. At first, those watching assumed it was trying to turn itself into a temporary barricade to funnel the flow of enemies. Then its side blew open, swinging down as a ramp. Condensing air wafted out, occluding the sight. 4 mutation forms immediately sprang into the entrance, hissing with deadly intent. There were crunching, snapping sounds, and the screeches of the dying. An unnatural silence fell upon the scene, broken only by Irael's ever-present hum and the faintly rocking beat that was Nerve's response. The horde stepped forward, ready to continue its implacable advance. Voices, loud and distorted, mixing together in a practiced cadence, blasted out of the truck's hold. "This city is tainted! Purge it with bolts and sword and fire!" Bolt of fire streamed out of the misty space, in a constant disciplined firing line instead of the powerful but separate sweep of tank-mounted bolt guns. The muddled mass seemed to cave inwards, as those within poured storm bolter, double-barrel bolt guns into the horde. There was no saving these people. They were dead if mobile. There was no cure. "There is only the last rites, the blessing of purity. We anoint you with fire. Go in peace to your rest." 8 hard-shelled boots stepped in unison upon plate titanium, and a combined weight bent even that reinforced ramp. In the shadow of the angel they shone, their armour painted in slightly fluorescent gold pigment. This was their guiding doctrine, and it was worth attracting attention, hostile or otherwise. It was always better that the enemy seek to test themselves against their armour, instead of reaving some hapless, fleshy civilian. "We are sworn to protect! We are given to preserve!" Their armour was thick and curved and gave them a slightly hunched over look. They had helmets somewhat bear-like, but sufficiently angled to repel strikes. They held storm bolters with their right hand. As bolt rifles were merely bolters with a longer, less wrist-breaking stock and a drum feed. These were two, wielded together, and had a box feed of at least 50 rounds each. Firing 3-round bursts, they were deadly if ammo-hungry. "We release you from your tortured thrall!" Their left arms ended in oversized gauntlets, sparking with energy. It was soon apparent why. A swing of powered fists pulped whatever they met, and the deadly electrical fields combined to fry anything it touched. Thick enough to resist most attacks, weapon and shield in one. "To allies we give honour! To enemies of man, ruin!" Their breastplates held decorative moulds of rings over a red globe. Their thick, oversized pauldrons bore the marks 01 on the left, and on the right a 4-leaf flower overlaid with the skull and crossbones. If the infested ones had left some glimmer of intelligence, or any imparted instinct, it was enough sign that they hesitated. None could turn back to flee. There were too many. They towered above mere men, shining with baneful purpose. The drumbeat sound of nerve was intended to engender anticipation, as a counter to aimless fear. It had no real function. Yet at that point, it seemed, that anticipation was fulfilled. "Know that we are Terminatus Legio, Heraclitus! The final word is here! We shall end you!" There were already previous versions of powered armour in use. Most of them were more on speed and tactical efficiency than with turning the user into an unstoppable juggernaut. The greatest pitfall was in the power supply. Nothing short of a compact nuclear reactor could possibly provide that much motive power for the systems. In addition, it was only logical that the heavier the armour, the slower the response. The solution? High-efficiency capacitors and superconducting wire, and using big, very strong men at the start to boot the increase at an exponential level. The costs were tremendous. The results, well worthy. "Our duty is honour and death is our reward! For we are the chosen, and we shall know no fear!" They fired until they ran out of rounds, unsurprisingly quickly. They paused and stepped back, continuing their litany. The words were more than mere boasts, as the stated function of the Terminators was to dive headlong into the thickest, most contested of battles and be constantly outnumbered. Morale was of vast importance, especially so when the enemy was undying and unrelenting. The specific cadence timed the sequence of actions, seconds matched the flow, and all as one they adhered to the visceral perfection of that pattern. The second rank pushed forward as the first reloaded, shouting out their words and pounding away in vehement emphasis. "We carry the lightning! We bring the thunder!" Their shields and their hammers crackled with energy. Their left held back the great mass of mindless malice, while their right smashed heads beyond all hope of recovery. Electricity stunned the infestations long enough, passing through the huddled throng, that they could be smoked with efficient, practiced ease, or trampled under nearly a ton of weight. With every swing, they took out 4, 5 enemies. "We hold the strength to let humanity posture! We carry the virtue to let smash its enemies into dust!" The assault Terminators could keep going at it for hours, but after several more breaths, stepped back to let the first rank back into the fray. "There is no enemy beyond our might! There is no safety against our ranks!" Bolt of fire widened the gap they broke open. In a straight-up fight, or any fortress wall, nothing could stand up to their determination. 2 Marines took up positions at the sides, hefting large Gatling guns, cut-down versions of the famed anti-tank aircraft assault cannon. The flanks would be secured. "We are proud to live! We are proud to die! We are forged in war! We are tempered in blood! In our souls, we craft the victory of all mankind!" As they opened up, the tank crews behind them groaned at how the Terminators were outdistancing the heavy armour. Again, their only weak point was from the back, which was perhaps just as well. Regular troops took out the stragglers, secured the barricades and waited for the powered trooper to finish their litany. Never had they actually heard it said to completion, and dreaded the moment it had to be said twice. The third rank moved up, and they wielded massive, ungainly-looking guns. Then they set the enemy ablaze. "Burn, heretic!
burn in cleansing flame! Rejoice in the fires of your absolution! The top turret hatch of the destroyer-pattern Lehman Russ popped up, and a young teen poked his head out to breathe in the dank, stifling air. He watched the warriors break the tide, with the rest of the soldiery surging to fill the gap. The tank he occupied surged onwards, but found the Terminator squad still keeping pace slightly ahead. To the darkness we bring fire! To the ignorant we bring faith! To the helpless we give our hand! To the corrupt we give our fist! He smiled slightly. They are not my Astartes, not yet. These are not my Imperial Guard. He looked up, past buildings and the signs of battle ongoing. But this is my city, and these are my people, and they are those I love. His assistant emerged from the other hatch. He had the white robes of the attached psychic corps and the Javelese helmet. Your Excellency, I am most pleased to report that the basilisks have finished unloading. Shinji sighed heavily and nodded. Technically, it was better than my lordship, since it was applicable to ambassadors too, which it was, officially. Thank you. Please contact Brother Captain at Kruvopolis and tell him to pull back. Once they are clear, turn the enemy to stone. It shall be done. The man closed his eyes and muttered under his breath. The Terminators were not under the command of the UN or any other national force. They were, technically, mercenaries. He hired them, equipped them, and inasmuch as they were directly sworn to his service, he had promised not to go off and break any more fortresses with them. Tokyo Free, Fortress City, didn't count. At his word, they pivoted and marched back in good order. The Russians couldn't give the Lehman Russ a 13-inch cannon. They put that into the Basilisk mobile artillery. That was, incidentally, the same caliber used in the Mega Bolter 330mm rounds. One of the right-robed people with the funky hats received target data and the orders to fire for effect. Instead of high explosive, the basilisks fired shells filled with a special quirk-hardening glop that covered the field. Beings of sufficient strength and leverage, like, say, elephants and terminators, could break free with ease. Others with more spindly limbs would be trapped by a layer of rubbery but inflexible crud. There were also substances more similar to sticky glue that suffocated and bound down the targets the more they struggled. Then, of course, those that eventually hardened into a stone-like substance. And with a few more barrages, more than 18,000 people were ready to be purged by bolt, blade, or fire. The rest were too diffuse, but even if concentrated into one mass would prove less of a challenge. Psychic adepts from Javal joined the front lines, ready against further surprises and mutation forms. Shinji wanted to reap. He had wanted to slip into the city almost unseen. That was why he'd chosen his own birthday to arrive. A present to himself, and announcing his presence the day afterwards cut off any seeming expectations of receiving gifts. This wasn't what he wanted of his homecoming. He wanted to weep, but instead felt burning, fluid fury well up from within. All this death, all this destruction. For what? To prove a point? He looked to the northwest, past the obstructing buildings, and howled, Nagisa! Kaworu blinked. He couldn't move. He couldn't blink. Such murderous intent. It gave no hope for survival, no chance of success. It was beautiful. He got shot out of the sky. The barrel Leo skidded to a stop upon a roofline. It took him a few moments to take back his breath. Oh my, he whispered. He returned a little different from what I expected. The rave spread through Iriel's domain of uncertain space. It affected the combatants in different ways. Those that relied upon the support of Iriel's AT field were numbed by the threat of absolute certainty, as if their doom was writ in the sky of universal law. "What's that?" Asuka gasped. She and Rei felt as like a warm touch upon their AT fields, while Mana's left arm tingled. Not unpleasantly. She blinked and shook her head slightly as if to shake off loose thoughts. "Ayanami! Kirishima! Let's switch!" "Understood." "Roger that, Soyu." 3 was the optimal number. Matched against each other, the best they could do was fight to a standstill. Matched to purpose.
Close combat, long range, general support. The Trident Warborns had a slight but definite advantage. So far, all fought separately. With Kaworu briefly out of the picture, the defenders could combine forces. The Trident pilots, being enhanced humans, recovered faster. Martin regained awareness just in time to see Unit 2 turning past the corner to flee. The serrated wounds of his machine had mostly healed. Why did she choose to not finish the job while he was helpless? More misguided mercy? He snarled and stomped forward with his saurian machine. Coward! Face me, saw you! Just because you're weak and pathetic won't keep me from destroying you when I finally run you down! The jagged wolf turned into the street the Ava went through, and found something standing at the middle of the road to block his path. It was red and black and gold, and its banner showed a three-pronged spear. Trident. What idiocy is this? The pilot sneered. The Land Dreadnought was such a pretentious name. It was so short and stubby, less than half the size of his own Trident land cruiser. It was no challenge at all, he thought. I'm not sure what your beef is with Sawyu. I can't say I'm in any way a close friend of hers, but you're not worth her time. I'm putting you down, you embarrassment to the name, you fake Trident! Martin grinned madly. I suppose you think you can stop me with that toy. Magnus Tancred lifted a leg and stomped down. Then the other. It leaned slightly forward, as like a sumo wrestler. The Krutakoa brandished its claws and talon, and snapped its jagged beak. Fool, let me show you what it means to play in the big games. The Trident Warborn charged and pounced, slamming the Trident Land Dreadnought into the ground. It screeched in victory and bent down to tear the impudent human machine to shreds. Then realised that unlike Evangelions and more humanoid mecha, the Land Dreadnought had no obvious protuberances to tear off. Its torso was one solid block of armour with flat surfaces that couldn't be bitten into or stabbed through. And unlike the Ava, and to a lesser extent the Trident Warborn, Magnus Tancred felt no pain. Magnus Tancred knew no fear. Magnus Tancred had several powerful weapons integrated into its torso, all pointing at the enemy's soft underbelly. The hard-mounted positron cannon pierced through several times. The 120mm cannon left a cluster of wounds, while the chin mount 20mm drew a ragged line down the enemy's abdomen, going down to where the legs joined the hip. Mana seemed to take savage glee in making sure the semi-biological Trident Warborn's groin was well and truly perforated. Flamers bathed the enemy, pouring into and cauterizing wounds. Martin screamed in pain, the feedback overflowing the sensations buffer. The Trident Warborns, unlike the Evangelions, fought with the level of animal brains, reading their pilot's intentions. It shifted its weight, and in the blind haze of pain failed to notice Magnus Tancred's left side was free. Wham! A four-clawed fist slammed into its head and squeezed. When it comes to sheer grip strength, the purely mechanical hold was superior to 5 tendon-pulled fingers. The jagged wolf's head slowly began to give way to oozing purplish fluid. Wham! 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 The Trident Warborn toppled to the side. Hydraulic jacks on the Land Dreadnought's back deployed to get it back to its feet. It sprayed flame and shot at the briefly stunned enemy for a few more moments. Slow, not a real match against the Evangelion, but its crude old control method did have some advantages over the mind-machine interface. Mana shivered, seeing her enemy beaten to a pulp. It felt like a divine imperative to crush the infidel machinery. The Trident was mankind's own pure vessel of war, and to integrate angel biology and parody of the Evangelions. Why, that sounded like heresy. Unit 0, the prototype machine, was less agile and less responsive than the other two Evangelions. This didn't matter much in ranged combat, and Rei's discipline fit neatly into the role as a sniper. The Phoenix Spasm was superior to the Trident Land Dreadnought in terms of general combat support, but had its own flaws. Primarily that it was a flying machine. It may not adhere to aeronautic principles, but still needed wings to fly. Precisely aimed shots from cover amputated one of its rings before it had a chance to react. Sarah winced. Due to the necessity of complex flight, feedback from the Trident Warborn's situation awareness was slightly greater than the other war machines. She fought to control its fall and slammed into the Earth's Cradle, etching the material as it vainly tried to hang on to the smooth surface with its claws. Then it seemed as if the angel's carapace turned to liquid and swallowed her up. Rei stepped out of cover and nodded, satisfied. She thought it likely that the enemy would not be returning too soon into the fight. That was simple. She should have done that before. Nagisa's own beam weapon restricted tactical movement, however, carefully keeping the combatants separate. Nagisa was the linchpin. Without him, the others quickly fell prey to their own lack of real combat experience. So now there were 3 against 1. She saw the land dreadnought stomping into view, and the stubby machine gave her a short bow. The Evangelion battle sim allowed them to appreciate the worth of fire support and of fighting to the enemy's weaknesses. Nagisa nudged his barrel Leos out of its hole and extended his awareness. "Well, isn't that interesting?" he noted. Uriel lashed out of its beam and sucked up an angry protesting Martin and his damaged jagged wolf back into itself. The offshore bombardment continued, pitting the Earth Cradle's shell. He turned his Trident Warborn towards the sea and fired. His positron beam had nearly the same output as one of those ship cannons. It was a conventional aphorism that a ship should be strong enough to take the hit of its own guns. This didn't apply to the Kringalith beam cruiser, as mere steel could never stand up to the energy packed into positron beam cannons. Sufficient armour to do so would never allow it to float. Positron beams travelled at close to the speed of light. There should have been no defence against that. However, the Kringalith fired its forward guns at the same instant as Kaworu, and their beams passed too close to each other, and the interacting magnetic fields deflected the shots. Kaworu blinked. "Offense and defense in one. Nicely done, humans." His trident drew power straight from Uriel's AT field, and while the ambient energies may be unlimited, there was still a defined restraint in how quickly the infested machine could take it and convert that energy. He heard a distinctive motor sound from behind him. He turned. "Oh, hello, Suryu-san," he replied cheerily. "I see you found your chain axe."
"It doesn't have to be this way, Kaworu. The others are already down. You don't have to do this,"
Asuka said, pleading.
"Come with us. We can protect you."
The hybrid shook his head sadly. "It's not that simple, Asuka. Following nerve will doom humanity just as surely as letting the angels win. The extremism of two sides is folly. We must have a third option." He looked up, and his red eyes flashed for a moment. "I will be a tool no longer, Asuka. I will be free. Instead of the elevation of egotistical aims, the short-sighted ambitions of the mortal few, there must be the greater good."
"I'm not saying things aren't hard right now, but what can helping the angels do? Stop this, Kaworu!"
"I have no choice. Devils were once angels too, and to be free, I need the tools of my enemy." Uriel's psychic beam covered them, sending Asuka's nerves stinging. The Trident Warborn floated up, barely dodging positron shots from below, and returned to the Earth's Cradle. Asuka snarled and angrily chopped into a building.
"I won't accept this! It's not over!"
"It's not over," said Shinji, as the reinforcement troops rushed to where roughly the centre of the Earth's Cradle hung over Tokyo 3. The volunteer Chinese and Russian troops, who had valuable experience in hunting down the infested populace, were already distributing themselves around the city and the tunnels. At least it would save the local troops from the necessary trauma of shooting down those who wore the faces they were familiar with. Brought along as temporary honour guards in thanks for how he had helped save the mainland from infestation, they proved all too useful now. The same way that his Lehman Russ designs rolled off the planets just in time to help cut into the spread of infestation. Too conveniently useful. Shinji cursed his luck. Was it some sort of unconscious precognitive preparation, or just bad coincidence? There was no mistaking that attacking on his birthday was a deliberate insult, though. "It's not over until that thing's dead," Shinji shouted. "Are you afraid of its monstrous size? Do you think it impossible that being so small and insignificant, such as we, can stand against that might?" Gauntleted hands slapped against silvered breastplates. "We conquer fear with every breath! We fight the gods until our deaths!" Shinji nodded. 24 of them stood there in 3 ranks. For a long time, Javal considered it a human folly to kill in the name of beings that could not be seen. Their strange form of Mayahana Buddhism excused ancestor worship with the reasoning that the spirits of ancestors could actually be caught again and contained within physical form. They retreated from the world to protect it and themselves from the temptations of psychic power. In solitude and discipline, they sought peace. Not that Javal was an entirely pacifistic society. They'd faced many challenges over their 900 years of existence, and the defenders polished to a pinnacle their own unique fighting arts. Gleaming armour, pure right robes, psychic charge weapons. Shinji repressed a sardonic grin. How ironic, these people who crafted demons as receptacles for their negative emotions and fled from persecution of their talents, were witch hunters par excellence. Their armour was not as thick and far less cumbersome than the Terminator Tacticals, though the old arts benefited from a few modern techniques. Their indomitable will and purity of purpose was their first and surest shield against the enemy. "We have no time for subtlety," he told them. "We must hammer away while the enemy is inattentive. From this there's no turning back. Only you can withstand the enemy's corruption. Only you can strike at its heart. This is a battle only you can win. You know the necessity. You know this is a fight where all of you will die." The gathered ranks of Javal warrior monks tapped their chests again. "We carry the light into the darkest places!" Shinji nodded somberly. It would have been an insult to pretend he was sorry to let them go. He couldn't accuse them of cowardice, and they respected that he had his own brand of courage, in realizing just when lives had to be spent to achieve victory. They were fighters of enlightenment. They would follow neither a psychotic conqueror nor a reapy idealist. They fought for the hope and the fury of all mankind. Ever had they been taught that the rote preparation of Javal's isolation not only kept them free from the depredations of a corrupt world, but that someday they must stand at the edge of apocalypse. The worth of their power and selective breeding was to give back the gifts of their humanity upon those final days. Prophecies were such great annoyances. The other adepts gathered around them had finished their ritual. "It is time," one of the elder monks said, approaching the boy and giving a slight bow of obedience. Power, all combined and amplified, that the psychic adepts could provide. Perhaps not since Javal's founding, however, had they known such precise and merciless control over powers vast and terrible. Shinji took out a small knife and cut open his palm. He slapped down onto the concrete, wincing slightly at the jagged bits of gravel entering the wound. Blood was the key, however. The arcane circle around the warrior monks flared, and 8 points stretched out. They were engulfed in white-hot light, and vanished. The boy remained kneeling, even as the healers started to attend to the wound. Martin snarled in outrage. "This isn't over, Nagisa! Send me back! We are not finished here!" The Trident Warborns had already healed, and unlike the Evangelions, could keep on fighting indefinitely. His own altered body could endure far more than the human limit. It was only reasonable to assume that if they could just extend the fighting, their victory was inevitable. Kaworu looked back blandly. No. He turned towards the recessed pod where Kaworu and Lader linked himself to the Earths Cradle. "Do you have enough samples, Doctor?" The scientist's breathing hissed harshly as he gave more and more of himself into the machine. He no longer needed to breathe, and his lungs had shrunk too much to contain the air needed to speak. "The first time, nearly 100,000 people had to die to create the usable generation of mindworms. Unique minds cultivate unique partners. Yes, I have improved upon the breed. We have the most resilient healers, the strongest amplifiers, the fastest to replicate. Natural selection for nanite colonies. Ha! Impressive. I wonder what we could have if the infestation you introduced into Russia completed filtering up to 1 million people. It would take far too long. We'll have to select for electrical resistance also. You know what bolter fire does to a body. It's your choice now if to speed up healing or reinforce the internal structure. I will need more experimental subjects. Dr. Lader licked dry lips. I am most interested in seeing
how this may affect an Evangelion.
You will have them, but we need to withdraw for now. Kaworu turned to look at the screens. For the greater good of the greater number. And aren't they unlimited, those yet to be born?
Homo sapiens superior. Intelligent, immortal, powerful. What's one world? It should be worth it. The greatest power out into the galaxy. Unstoppable, undying, the ultimate form of man.
Martin Bettelheim didn't care about any of that philosophizing. Nagisa, if Nerve stands in their way, why don't we just destroy them now? Kaworu frowned. The motives of this angel were never mine, Bettelheim-kun, he said chidingly. If we land the cradle here, we will never be able to get it to lift again. And you must know, there is still the moon's cradle. Unlike this mobile manufactorium, it actually has weapons.
Then why are we leaving? If we don't destroy the Evangelions now, they're just going to end up making trouble for us later.
Because, you self-absorbed half-mortal, with him back in his city, us dying here serves no purpose whatsoever. Have some sense. No, when we're at a disadvantage.
The cradle swayed, and if even the bombardment from offshore could not make it flinch, then as Martin stumbled, he realised. He couldn't imagine what it would take to make the floating fortress shake. Sarah, who had so far stood by unspeaking, clung to some overhanging banisters and slowly made her way to the monitor banks. The distant sound of a rippling explosion echoed through the central chamber. Dr. Lader screamed, feeling as if his own organs had burst, the loss of an internal power station affecting him directly. Who dares? Who dares? Holographic screens popped up. Armoured figures were cutting through all resistance and steadily making their way to Iriel's core. Their silver armour seemed to glow with an inner light, and certainly all the bullets bouncing off did not mar their sheen. Thick blast doors shut, but sparking blue blade spears cut through steel like a hot knife through tofu. We seek the enemy! We seek our destiny! The chosen of Javal do not turn from the task! Repent or be cleansed! Give way or be destroyed! Let none dim our light! Let none bar our path! Limbs and assorted body parts flew and splattered around their approach. Whatever their blades cut did not heal up again. Martin looked on in horror, realising that the core was just over there, its upper half poking through the floor. The teleportation platform was set right above it. And that corridor he was watching. Nagisa! Do something! Carol just sighed. Why don't I get any competent henchmen? I offer excellent health benefits, educational opportunities, even a direct share in the enterprise. I even have a catchphrase. How does he manage it with just inspirational speeches? Emotional logic is barely any logic at all! The door to the central chamber exploded inwards. This world is corrupt! Purification is now! This foe is vile! Vengeance has come! Autogun mounts opened up and unleashed a torrent of high-caliber fire at the sainted knights, though they wouldn't have accepted the simile. The warrior monks used now the utter certainty of Javal's traditions, instead of destroying their way of life. The boy and his disciples brought an end to complacence and unveiled the hidden aspects of their duty. They were taunted as cowards for hiding in their valley when all the world needed them. The power gained in isolation only bred weakness instead of strength. No longer. The old oaths must be fulfilled. We are the heirs of Enkidu! We are the wall! We are the holders of Enki! His righteous law! We are the shield of Buddha! We are the light! Machine gun fire may as well have been fresh spring rain. Rockets knocked back a few, but they quickly resumed formation. You raving lunatics, all of you! Kaworu shouted down at them. The distinctive red hexagon of an AT-field barrier appeared in their way. He wasn't surprised to see them just cut through it with sheer fanatical zeal. Unto the darkest places we carry this hope! We fight the long night! We keep to the old oath!
Warhammer40k Lader let out a keen wail as a thrown spear lodged itself into his chest. Several of his spare brains exploded. He withdrew his consciousness from his useless mortal shell and fled whimpering into the depths of the cradle's biomechanical nervous system. The spear, as if sensing the death of its quarry, flew back into its owner's waiting hand. "There, brothers!" One of the Javal warrior monks pointed at Irurel's core. "Their foe, the final piece of their heroism. They may die, but sagas equal to those great champions of the founding, perhaps even greater. Not even the old myths that they carried in an unbroken chain of oaths, stretching all the way down to India and Babylonia, had anything to place before their deeds valorous. The root of this malevolence! Charge!" "What are they?" Martin gasped. The deep machine-distorted voices filled the cavern, and their blade-first assault was unstoppable. They rushed up the stairs, and the Trident pilot dived for cover. Kaworu stood by, very near, but was ignored. He grinned slightly. Kaworu and Nagisa had ganked the Earth's Cradle. They were ready to gank it right back. Just as humans' ego borders were degraded in the presence of a strong AT field, so were their techniques to paralyze such a monster. They stabbed at their core, their blades plunging into the crystalline surface without any resistance whatsoever. Irurel's fear was palpable, and before all was lost, it prepared to cast itself into the void, exploding to take the enemy with it as it died. Mutation forms dropped from the ceiling and swamped the 24 in a riotous melee. Psychics were being hunted all over the world, enough that even sheltered Javal had to fear for their own safety. Many people got through life without ever knowing they had any psychic potential, but even ignorance of their own abilities did not save them from Kaworu's attentions. All for that moment. The half-angel leapt into the fray. He leapt on an armoured shoulder and twisted a helmeted head completely around. He took the psychic charge blade from the warrior monk's loose grip and swung out, decapitating another. "I can't resist it! I must say it!" he shouted in glee. "Just!" He leapt from shoulder to shoulder, stabbing through eye slits. "As!" He fell into a hole appearing in the fighting huddle and whirled into deadly action. "Planned!" He blocked and thrust and bisected those whose utter focus and lack of doubt may have been too short-sighted. Once past the idea that their armour was strengthened by their will, it was really nothing more than an exoframe covered by thin plates of folded iron infused with strange crystalline material. In mundane terms, it provided barely any more protection than hard leather. As much as it allowed the warriors to just ignore conventional weapons, and their glaives could cut through an AT field, the opposite was also true. A strong enough will, a soul shining in unbreakable surety, could overcome the defensive value of their mental fortitude. They were skilled and faithful, but all too human still. The pride of Javal did not equal the self-contained arrogance of Adam's memory. And then, there was silence again. Mutation forms drew away from his blood-splattered figure standing amidst the dead. The glow of those sanctified was slowly fading. Human flesh still had a ways to go before matching up to the will of millions old. He felt a thread of Irurel's appreciation, slavishly offering obedience to the Alpha. Angels were not pack creatures. Kaworu hurled his spear at the core, piercing it through, and Irurel died before it could even realise what was happening. He then picked up a decapitated head and casually tossed it into the many gaping slashes left on the core. The red-orange hue of the dead angel's core abruptly turned blue. "Dr. Lader, are you still self-aware? Grab control of the cradle's functions as much and as soon as you can. We need to get out of here before he realises what we've done." A rasping noise emerged from the speakers. Perhaps that was a yes. Martin Bettelheim was still in shock, and it was from stunned disbelief rather than courage that he asked, rather impertinently, "Nagisa, if you can do this, it's just a carry. What do you have to be afraid of? It doesn't make any sense." Kaworu turned, his glance revealing annoyance. The Trident pilot stepped back in fear, but Kaworu merely gestured to bring up a screen. Its shoulder zoomed in into external view of Shinji Ikari seated nonchalantly atop a Lehman Russ turret. He stared up at the curving underside of the cradle, and his expression was faintly puzzled. The tank rumbled along the streets as the defenders slowly consolidated forces. 6 Terminators marched alongside as his personal guards. A mutation form leapt out of cover, screeching as it dropped from a higher floor, too fast for his custodians to do anything about it. Shinji Ikari turned and frowned, slightly. The mutation form exploded into fine mist just before it would have reached him. Martin Bettelheim loathed the Evangelion pilots, but at least held them in some high regard to the rest of humanity. Ikari was no longer even a pilot. However, that look reminded him too much of Nagisa. He might decide to come along the next attack, and I'm not stupid enough to let him get within reach of my AT field, at least not while he's disinclined to indulge in intelligent discourse. Kaworu staunched at his own runes and shouted up again, "Now! We go!" Then with a loud pop of air rushing in to fill a temporary vacuum, the great bulk of the Earth's Cradle vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Had it really been only 3 hours since the cradle stole from them the light of day? The sky was already starting to turn gold in sunset, yet it seemed all so bright. How easily they could forget, for surely such terror and senseless violence belonged to the night. The enemy's sudden disappearance angered a few, but most were filled with relief. The terror faded slowly, to be replaced by grief. So many faceless dead, so many honest lives destroyed. The survivors faced the fading day in desperate denial. They'd kept faith that Nerve and Tokyo 3 could protect them, but this... it wasn't war. It was butchery. Even the soldiers who fought couldn't hold off the crushing despair. They were alive, true enough, but did that count as winning? Sergeant de Leon looked around and began to laugh. He laughed so hard it began to hurt. "Hey, Sarge! Hey!" Someone began slapping his back. "We survived, don't lose it now, okay? Don't get hysterical." He snorted and swept an arm around. "Look at it. Look at that devastation. I'm genuinely happy, you fuckers." He forced himself to regain some calm. He pointed to buildings with facades gutted or smashed through, roads torn up, hydrants spraying water up to the air. "Think I should be sad about that? We're alive, yeah. But that's not enough. Not those reinforcements. They're not proof." He grinned with blood-stained teeth, his eyes glittering madly. "Who else can destroy this city so thoroughly in trying to save it?" Comprehension dawned slowly on their faces. When they looked back, the runes bore a more joyous implication. "He's back! He's really back!" Another soldier began to gibber. "Fuck the angels, fuck the damage. It doesn't matter what happens. We're gonna win!" Someone else shouted. Dimly the sergeant wondered how it was that even gone for so many months, even he still had some faith. Why did it feel so rewarding? He watched 8 Lehman Russ battle tanks, designed specifically for combat within the cramped confines of a city, rumble on towards an open plaza. As implacable as the undying enemy, they too had someone who could push through, no matter what's in the way, the personification of their ultimate vengeance. It was cold comfort, and hot, savage slacking. It was an old saying and also true, that once sunk furthest down in the pit, from there on things can only get better. That sliver of hope was all they had left. Kensuke Ada stomped forward, meeting him halfway. "What the hell, Ikari? The Lehman Russ? Terminators? Terminators, Ikari? Fuck you! Fuck you, Ikari!" The gold-plated guards around the boy tensed, but were held back by their employer's laughter. "It's good to see you again, Kensuke. Sorry for stealing your thunder, but now you don't have to waste time planning the little stuff and go straight for your bane blades." The bespectacled boy grinned and held out his hand. "Thanks for the save, buddy." They grasped each other's forearms in the manner of old comrades. "Glad to help, but I wish it wasn't necessary." He saw more people approaching, and seeing his attention was elsewhere, Kensuke decided to step back. No way was he stupid enough to get in the way of that confrontation. Nerve had decided to show up, commiserating with its command officers those suffering at the surface. There were those that blamed them, there were those that thanked them, but each had to deal with the reality of how they failed. Asuka had puffy red eyes, as if she'd been crying. She snarled slightly at his approach. "Now you think you could just ride in at the last moment like some sort of conquering hero?" she asked bitterly. Sorry, Asuka. I didn't really want it to happen this way. They'd all failed in this together. His fingers twitched, his gaze was mournful. Are you alright?
You baka! Stupid Shinji! Stupid! So stupid!
She had enough. All the betrayals and intrigue and uncertainties. At least he was so consistently foolish, her own baka Shinji. That didn't seem to have changed. She clung to him and soaked his jacket with LCL and her own tears.
How stupid!
Yeah, I guess I am, he replied softly, hugging back. As long as you're there to point it out, I think I'll be okay. He needed someone who could see beyond the haze of grateful reverence. He needed someone who still saw him as a friend and equal. I missed you, he whispered into her ear. They drew strength from each other's presence for a few moments, accepting how much more they still had to suffer through.
Shinji, promise me.
Asuka looked up, her eyes teary but determined.
Don't take this away from me. It's my responsibility. Leave Kaworu to me. He's my problem to solve.
He blinked. Oh, damn you, Nagisa. All that for this? It was staggering. It would work. He couldn't break his word. For others to continue in his shadow, his life needed to be honour itself. But Asuka...
Promise me, Shinji. I have to. He can still be saved.
I know. Nagisa, Asuka. I met him at Egypt. I fought him again at Brazil. He caused the deaths of hundreds of thousands at the Siberian border. He doesn't care what he has to sacrifice. He wants to create something new and terrible, and a new world out of the corpse of this one. He's our enemy, Asuka. You can't trust Nagisa.
I have to believe. We're doing good. We're more than just murderers. We're more than just the pawns of feeble old men. Shinji, I have to save those I can save. I have my own strength, damn it!
A promise made under duress didn't count. He could also just say no. All it would cost him was Asuka's friendship. Was she therefore just a tool to him? One more thing to sacrifice for his goals? He sighed. The ends mattered, but what was the point if once there it turned out one had become unworthy of the prize? All right. I won't kill him if we meet again. How about maiming? Can I do maiming? He had to have faith in return. He didn't have to be alone. He nodded, trusting that she could do as she sworn to herself. The others had arrived. Move over, Suyu, said Rei, as she pushed her way into the embrace. I am most annoyed with you, Ikari-kun. Shinji chuckled sheepishly. Sorry for the secrecy, Mana, summoning up all her reserves of courage, had tackled him from the side and shoved her tongue into his mouth.
Hey!
Asuka yelped in indignation as all tangled together they stumbled to keep on their feet. Mana let go and blushed terribly, and amidst stammering apologies the auburn-haired girl found she couldn't disentangle herself. It was embarrassing for all of them.
Well, moving fast to reclaim lost ground, aren't we, Shinji-kun?
Misato grinned impishly at them. Misato-san, help! The woman added herself to the hug, pressing her breast to the back of his head.
Welcome back, Shinji.
Maya looked on at the odd scene and grinned. Shinji gave her a look that said, oh fine, just get it over with, and tried to keep his feet as she too pressed herself upon him, and perhaps to accidentally grope at Misato-senpai as well. Makoto had gone up as well to check on Kodama Haraki. She'd survived and latched onto him immediately. Kaide defiantly held on to the other arm. As he caught a glimpse of Tokyo 3's returning son, buried under a pile of nubile female flesh, he shouted inside, How does he get away with that? The pair of girls with him were giving each other death glares. I really need to learn such critical survival skills. Shinji mentally shouted to his armoured guards, his sworn psychic supporters, whoever that could hear him. Help me, you bastards! Stop laughing! Anyone! Help! Deep below Tokyo 3, Evangelion Unit 1's eyes flashed. A slow, satisfied rumble issued forth. He was back. It was good.